Hi, I'm Brian Wallace from CLA, the Laundry Association. We're the nonprofit professional organization representing the laundromat industry here in Indiana and of course all across the country. Our goal today is to have a little bit of a tutorial and explainer on microplastics and microfiber pollution and some of the legislation that's been introduced around the country that is really requiring that new washing machines come with their own microfiber filtration system. And so that very prescriptive legislation is not a great fit for our industry, so we thought we'd take a few minutes to explain how and maybe that there's a better way to get this done. So let's go in and take a look at Fresh Laundry in Highland, Indiana. We're here with Chris Schultz. He's the owner here at Fresh Laundry in Highland, Indiana, but he's also engaged with CLA as a volunteer leader and has a real strong technical and mechanical background that we're going to tap into as we try to better understand the impact of microfiber pollution and then solutions around the laundromat business. And Chris, you and I were talking earlier how the legislation has been calling for what we'll call a per washer filtration solution, and I think that that was really well intended, but primarily for the residential application where you would have a single washer in your home, a small pump drain type washing machine, whereas we're here in your beautiful Fresh Laundry with a couple dozen machines, large capacity machines, and really a totally different environment than what you'd find on the residential front.
Yeah, for sure. So in a residential machine, you have what's called a pump drain. That's the number one challenge of commercial. Commercial does not have a pump inside of it. They have what's called a gravity drain. So essentially there's a valve in the bottom that just lets the water out. Gravity does the job of the water leaving the machine. A 100 micron filter is so fine that that pump in residential settings is a critical piece of hardware that pushes the water through the filter. In commercial, we don't have that luxury. So essentially, anytime water passed through that filter, it'd probably instantly clog it up with particles, and you'd have just no drain conditions on every single machine all the time.
Yeah, and again, this is just really a matter of education, right? We're just trying to help folks that are in these positions to consider legislation, to better understand this particular environment and find ways that maybe there's a better solution that we can bring to bear. So I think maybe next, Chris, we ought to take a look at kind of the behind the scenes, kind of where the plumbing works, where the machines drain, and get a little better sense of how laundromats work and why this solution is not really a great one for us.
Yeah, for sure. I'd like to point out that at the front of the machine right away, if you were to put a filter in, there's nowhere to clean the filter out. This is a service panel. It's very cumbersome to take off. So just from the standpoint on the front, we're not able to easily add a filter here.
All right, Chris, now we've kind of taken a swing around here where we're going to take a look at behind the scenes at some of the mechanicals and what makes a laundromat tick. And this is an area of real concern when it comes to some of the legislation that we've been seeing, because this is where everything happens. So maybe you can just give us a quick primer on what is the function of this bulkhead and how the machines are supposed to drain properly in this space.
Yeah, so first of all, this is called a bulkhead. This is where you put all your mechanicals for washers. So you have your plumbing, both supply and drains, and as well as your electric back here. If you have any ancillary systems, like we have chemical that's pumped into this large washer, those pipes do run down here as well. And typically, this area is reserved only for ownership level people or technicians. We don't really give attendants daily access to this because there are a lot of hazards. You have water pipes that can be hot. You have hoses that you can easily knock off. You have electrical that you can easily knock off. This is not an area that's accessible to either employees or customers, especially not customers, due to the hazards that can be present in here. Now you can see that the drains are on the bottom of the machine down there. The drains go directly from the machine to the thing in the center that's called a drain trough. That drain trough serves a purpose of catching the pens, the lint, the credit cards, the IDs, you wouldn't believe some of the weird things that come through washers and get washed into the drain trough. So we are already filtering the lint out of, the wastewater via a lint filter in there, but you can see that there's nowhere between the machine and the trough, or really the trough and the drain, to add a large complex filter that would, necessarily need cleaning every how many cycles.
It's a great opportunity to remind everybody some of the components of the legislation. All these washers on this bulkhead, what, I don't know, 20-ish washers that are on this bulkhead, each would need their own individual filter to meet the standard. Number two, part of the legislation also calls for conspicuous signage instructing consumers on how to clean the filters themselves.
Yeah, which is absolutely unacceptable in a commercial setting. Again, we're sort of in a nice case scenario here where we have an attendant full time, so there's always an employee at this store to help customers. You know, you have a lot of laundromats out there that don't have an attendant. They're called unattended self-service laundries. So those settings don't have somebody to clean the filters, you know, on the employee level. And again, you would not want, you know, just a regular customer opening something where the water is passing through or having access to a bulkhead.
So like I said, this is an area reserved for trained technicians. This is an area that, with the legislation, if it goes through, it would have 20 plus individual filters on each and every machine and interrupting the flow. And as Chris said, these are really cleverly designed to drain quickly for the proper operation of the equipment to keep consumers moving through. So this is sort of the nerve center of the laundromat, and this is an opportunity for the machines to work properly. The requirements in the current legislation would really cause a major disruption for not just ownership, but for the customers that are here on a nice Wednesday morning trying to get their laundry done. And again, we want to be part of the solution here. We just know that a per washer filter intended for the residential side, this is a whole different environment. So let's take a closer look at some of the other mechanicals here in this store. All right, Chris, we naturally started with the big washers toward the front of the store. Now we're back a little bit further in the store with some of the smaller washers and yet another bulkhead that maybe is a little bit more typical of the confined spaces that you'd find in the laundromat setting.
Yeah, for sure. So this bulkhead does have other access points, but in a typical laundromat, you wouldn't be surprised to open the access panel and see that this is the extent of the access hazard. You're, you know, shimmying against a live electrical panel, or they'd expect you to take the tops off and jump in through the top. This is, again, more typical of something you'd see when you open an access door, sort of limited access. All right, so we're inside the bulkhead. Again, this is a great example of a bulkhead. Very few can you actually get inside and sit down. But as you can see here, we have the incoming water, both hot and cold. And all these hoses are really nicely tied up. What we're looking at right now is almost best case scenario. That's because this store just opened not even a year ago. Typically, in older stores, you know, this will all be sort of all over the place. But, you know, this is a great example. We have all the water up here. We have our electrical cords up here plugged into, you know, commercial locking outlets. You don't want someone to be walking through here, accidentally hit a hose, accidentally hit electrical. They're shorting something out. Again, you're creating a real big hazard for, you know, your everyday employees that really don't belong in a mechanical area. You can liken this to a mechanical room in a high-rise or any other building that you've gone in where you see restricted access. This is essentially a mechanical room inside the laundromat. We definitely don't want people back here on a regular basis. You know, this machine wasn't filling. We have a wide open 3-inch drain valve that lets the water out. This was stuck in the drain valve, causing the machine not to fill, which takes this machine out of service until a service tech can get here. You know, this is a small example of something that goes through the drains regularly that's caught in the trough side. So if there was some sort of filter that was even finer on this, you know, these objects would get caught in it all the time. You'd have these machines going out of service all the time for these reasons.
Chris, let's talk some laundromat economics 101. And for people that aren't familiar with the industry, may have no idea what this machine costs. And then if we start to contemplate some of the potential solutions to meet the legislation, how that cost would not only impact the business owner, but more importantly, the end customer. So what are we looking at here in terms of just the basic economics of putting one of these into service?
Correct. So this is a 135-pound washer. Typically, at this point in history, this is the largest washer you put into a laundromat. This machine costs upwards of $25,000 just for this one unit. That's just the machine. That's not taxes, delivery, installation. You know, so all in, you could be looking at $30,000 just for this one machine. This machine is vended for $21, which, as you can see in our case, includes the soap. That's not included in the machine. That's just our store. So putting in R&D money to redesign a filter that goes on this machine, maybe that cost goes from $25,000 to $27,000. And I think the important thing to note here is that ultimately the cost of this machine and the cost to build a laundromat is going to fall on the end user. It's going to fall on the person who can afford it the least, because at the end of the day, people who open the stores, they're going to charge what they need to charge for the laundromat to be profitable. We really need to make sure that laundry stays sustainable for the people who need it most. I want to not only take into account the price increase that would happen if this machine had to be redesigned for a microfiber filter, but also the labor costs. So not only do I have to pay more to get this machine, but I have to pay more to keep this machine in service, because an employee is going to be servicing this machine every 1 to 5 loads, let's say, with the volume of water that's going to be leaving this machine. So between the cost of labor and the cost of the equipment, and not to mention these filters, when I did my research into the filters are not necessarily reusable. So in some cases, you have to take them out of service and buy another filter. So if we're talking about cost of the filters, that could take this machine from $21 up to $25, which is a massive price increase. It puts a lot of cost on the end consumer. Again, in the neighborhoods that you don't want to throw a bunch of extra costs at, again, I think we should find a system that works for commercial. If it's a problem, I think we should solve it, but this is not the solution.
All right, Chris, well, equipment maintenance is just part of the job when you're running a laundromat. And the minute one of these washers started making a little bit of a funny noise, you noticed immediately and you wanted to take a look, and maybe kind of show us what it's typically like just to take a peek behind the washers.
Yeah, for sure. So if I don't want to go through the process, getting the keys, getting behind the bulkhead, I didn't want to crawl through all the water hoses and electrical and all that sort of stuff. I need to find out the model and serial of this machine. I was just doing it as quickly as possible. So there's really no easy way to do it from right here. So, I'm gonna go with my phone. I gotta sort of climb up here, stay along the edges so I don't crush the machine, and reach down here, find that model serial tag, and take a picture of it. Obviously, again, this is another example of how we don't expect, our employees or people who are here, customers especially, to do any sort of service or maintenance.
Yeah, it's not easily accessible. Leave it to the pros,
right.
And we don't want to get anyone hurt or injured just in the process of trying to clean out a filter. Well, Chris, one of the other differences between the residential application and the commercial environment like a laundromat is we have no control of what people bring in, how the garments are soiled, what's jammed in the pockets, and so maybe give us a little bit of flavor of some of the things that, just for example, might come through the doors here, commercial accounts, or things that you might find in the drain trough. Like
you said, we have no control over what people put in these machines. It's not like an employee or someone comes and sorts through people's laundry. So we don't check their pockets. Typically, they don't check their pockets. On top of that, we have, mechanic shops will bring greasy rags. You'll have pet stores or, vet clinics bringing dog beds or dog towels. You'll have nail salons bringing rags that they use to clean nails. Just an example of things that can be soiled with materials that could essentially destroy a filter. If you had a filter in there and you wash a dog bed, that filter would be garbage within one cycle, no doubt.
The minute a nail file gets through the drain, it would just wreck a filter. So.
Exactly, yeah. And another great example is, think of construction workers. They have the drywall screws in their pockets all the time. They wash those. We get drywall screws in the drain troughs, clogging the drain valves, in the lint drawers, scraping it. They destroy dryers. We get drywall screws all the time. If you had a handful of drywall screws going into a 100 micron filter, that filter's toast.
All right, hope you enjoyed this tour of Fresh Laundry in Highland, Indiana, as we look a little bit behind the scenes to better understand the impact of the microfiber filtration mandates that are being suggested in a lot of the model legislation we're seeing around the country. While we're very sympathetic and want to see pollution captured, we know that the heavily prescriptive model legislation requiring a 100 micron filter on every single washer, like here in this laundromat, is not the best way to go. We've got significant R&D and cost considerations. We have customers that we don't want to have access to cleaning a filter. We know that people are here to get their laundry done quickly and efficiently, and the way the legislation's currently put together, it would really disrupt the day-to-day at the laundromat. So let's work together, let's find a better solution, and we'll see you next time.